Well, I was ready to start this podcast by talking about how the Seahawks are the most penalized team in the league, which they are, and how Geno was not the answer because he threw two picks and then could have thrown two more, one of them being a pick six very easily. And this is something he does. He opens up the game, one touchdown. This game, two touchdowns. But it turns out Geno has a clutch gene and used it today and scored when it mattered most, beating the Cleveland Browns 24-20 in a game that looked extremely bleak, in a game that started off 14-0 Seahawks and then was 17-7 Seahawks, and then for the longest time was 20-17 Browns. And the Seahawks couldn't get anything going. Offense couldn't get anything going, especially. Defense was allowing a ton of rushing yards to Kareem Hunt and David Njoku and Amari Cooper. And one of my main conclusions about this game is that if the Browns were fielding anyone even slightly better at quarterback than P.J. Walker made just enough mistakes to lose this one. And I'm looking at the box score here, and I see Dorian Thompson-Robinson, DTR, the guy that gave UW nightmares last year as the UCLA quarterback, and that played extremely well in the preseason, had a bad game when he had to come in for Deshaun Watson, but I would have been much more scared of DTR than what I saw from P.J. Walker. It shows Kareem Hunt only had 14 carries for 55 yards and Pierre Strong 10 carries for 41 yards, but it felt like so much more. And same thing with Jerome Ford, 9 carries, 37 yards. It's interesting they use a three-headed running back committee. I'm not sure that's optimal because I think all of them have skill, but you got to give each of them an opportunity to get a flow. And they have different running styles. I mean, better for us, but I didn't see a ton of resistance from the Seahawks in the run game. Amari Cooper, tremendous. I expected this from Amari Cooper. 6 catches for 89 yards. Could have been worse. He had 11 targets. If P.J. Walker is a little bit of a better quarterback, then Amari Cooper has well over 100 yards. And David Njoku, 4 catches, 77, also had a great game. Elijah Moore could have had a better game for them. Listen, the Browns were a game team. This is a team that beat the 49ers. This is a team that, I believe, beat the Colts last week. It was a very, very close game, very high-scoring game, put up, I think, 40 points. And is no slouch, even though their roster right now, without Deshaun Watson, without Nick Chubb, might tell you that they could be a slouch, but they're not. And what it took from this team, the Seahawks, to be able to win this was a clutch performance also by the defense when it mattered. And this has been the overall, listen, there's been many iterations of this team over the past, since the Pete Carroll era, over the past 13 years. But the overarching theme of this team is that, or of this defense, is that they may give up a lot of yards, which they did. I think the Browns outgained them in this one maybe by 20 yards. They had almost 400 total yards. But when a play needs to be made, the Seattle defense is generally a clutch defense. When the game is close, they make a play when they have to. And in this one, it was Jamal Adams. Welcome back, Jamal Adams, in earnest in this one. This was his real welcome back game. He's Tried to play, I think, in 2 previous games in this one without a huge impact. But that rush at the end of the game when Cleveland could have marched down the field and scored, and Jamal Adams with his soccer player skills jumping in there and heading the ball, allowing for the interception by Julian Love, ended up being the play of the game on defense. And this was on a defense that many players had good games. Unlike what I saw from the UW defense yesterday, this defense, Bobby Wagner, a classic Bobby Wagner game. He combined for 13 total tackles, only had 3 solo tackles, but had a pass defense and a tackle for loss. Was solid, more solid in this one than I've seen him in previous games. In previous games, when a runner, like a running back, for example, was tackling him, the runner would drag Bobby for an extra yard or 2. In this one, it was where Bobby was getting him, he was going down. So kudos to Bobby on this one. Jordyn Brooks, this is a second straight great game by Jordyn Brooks. And it started early with his sack, big sack, and he had 2 QB hits as well, and of course 10 total tackles. Great game by him. Jamal Adams, we touched on him. 8 total tackles, 1 tackle for loss, 1 pass defense, and that pass defense is what caused that interception that allowed for the game-winning drive. Boye Mafe. Boy, did he have a game. Boye Mafe. Great game. Had 4 QB hits, a sack, a tackle for loss, and as a defensive lineman had 8 total tackles, which sometimes you don't see. And oftentimes you actually don't see. A lot of times you see guys that are pass rushers don't nearly have that number of tackles. So Boye Mafe, what a great game. Darrell Taylor showed up in this one. Also got a sack, a tackle for loss, a QB hit. Made a big play late in this game. Julian Love coming up with the interception. Tariq Woolen. Interesting game for Tariq. Had the interception. Should have had a second one that he had in his hands, and it just fell out there at the end of the game, towards the end of the game. And I think should have had a third one as well. But his initial interception, you got to hold on to that ball, man. I mean, that was very close to David Njoku just taking it right back from you. I mean, by the slightest of margins, you got that interception and it wasn't taken back from you. But good game overall. Some tough calls went against Tariq Woolen on this one. Some really kind of ticky-tack penalties. Trey Brown, big stop guarding Amari Cooper that could have resulted in that touchdown late in the game. Great job, Trey Brown. Devin Witherspoon, I think he played okay. Didn't see him a lot out there. Didn't hear his name a lot. I think he had 1 good play and then 1 unfortunate call went against him. Draymond Jones, I'm seeing here, had 3 QB hits, but it was a quiet 3 QB hits, but hey, listen, I think he probably was the one that assisted with a lot of those great plays by Boye Mafe and Darrell Taylor. He was just kind of in the background doing it. So, great game by the defense. Boye Mafe also recovered the P.J. Walker fumble. If I'm giving a player of the game for the Seahawks defense, it's going to Boye Mafe for sure. It's great to see his development. I didn't know he was going to explode in the way that he has on this defense. The Seattle offense. This is a trend. If you watch Seahawks games, they start off good with either a quick opening drive touchdown or, in this case, 2 touchdowns, 1 by Jake Bobo, who I would like to see more involved, but of course this team has a lot of weapons. He had a rushing touchdown. He also had another catch, I believe. And then a dime thrown by Geno Smith to Tyler Lockett after he evaded Myles Garrett in that Browns rush. That was a great play. That was in Geno's career highlights. That will go down as one of his better plays. But after that first quarter, the second and third and half of that fourth quarter were like they were dragging in mud. And I don't know what happens to this team in the middle of the game on offense, but they do this bookend type of thing where they're good in the beginning and then good in the end. And hey, listen, I mean that's the Pete Carroll mantra. You can't win the game in the first, second, or third quarter, but you can in the fourth. And I guess their players take it to heart sometimes, almost too literally. Make it a little bit easier so you don't have to be in all these close games like you did against the Giants. But the Giants, really, that was a defensive performance. But on offense, I'm trying to think back. Of course, didn't do it against the Rams. Didn't do it against the Cardinals, I don't think. Didn't do it against the Lions. Didn't do it in... I don't think they blew out anybody this season, if I'm not mistaken. But I wish they would, because they have the capacity to do it. And we saw their weapons again today. Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet stood out to me. Great games by them. I would have liked to actually see us run the ball more. I said this last week. I want to see Kenneth Walker get at least 20 carries. I know Zach Charbonnet was out, and Zach Charbonnet had a good game today. Man, 5 carries, 53 yards. That's 10.6 yards per carry by Charbonnet. And especially in that fourth quarter on that last drive or two. Just a physical back. And you know that classic thunder and lightning type of running back combination. That's what this is. I mean, Kenneth Walker has the speed. He's the lightning. And Zach Charbonnet is that thunder with that boom. And I tell you what, he's a powerful back. And he lowers that shoulder on every run. But between those two, they only had 13 rushes. And when I was paying attention to that throughout the game, I was thinking this is going to be another reason for our downfall. And I'm thinking, Shane Waldron, you had success with running the ball 20 times last game, or it was 26 times last game. Why did you go away from it this time? It's not like you were getting blown out at any point. I mean, the biggest Browns lead was 20-17, and you were ahead for most of this. Well, for a good portion of this game at 14-0, 17-7, 17-14. And again, we saw a glimpse of the greatest wide receiving quartet in the NFL. Tyler Lockett, 8 catches, 81 yards, and a touchdown. Just so efficient in this one. Just time and time again, Tyler Lockett was the guy that bailed us out on some of these drives. DK Metcalf, 5 catches, 67 yards. That one big one at the beginning of the game for 43 yards, but he was targeted 14 times. Could have had way more, but Geno kept throwing it low to him for whatever reason. And I know they mentioned that in the broadcast, saying, oh, you got to throw it high to DK. And I agree, when he's open, you got to do that. But I'm also of the mind of, as somebody that's been watching football for a lot of years, and you see a guy like Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers that didn't throw a lot of interceptions, it's because they are making the decision to, if they have an option of throwing it high or throwing it low, throwing it a little bit lower because it's less likely to get intercepted. So I like that general thought of throwing it basically at the breadbasket as opposed to like at the face. But it could have been a huge game for DK Metcalf, but got the job done. Jackson Smith-Njigba, shout out JSN, had the game-winning touchdown, caught the ball, ran around the edge, did some nice little toe tapping to stay in bounds, and had that game-winning touchdown. And as I mentioned before, Jake Bobo, had that rush for 3 yards and a touchdown and had 2 catches, 23 yards. If he is not the fourth receiver, he can do so much more than this. And I know because he is very skilled, and he showed it. When DK Metcalf was out last week, we know what he did. Noah Fant, big run on that final drive there to stay inbounds instead of going out of bounds. Got some crucial yardage there. Gained an extra maybe 10 to 15 yards. Dissly and Parkinson, mostly blockers in this one. I think Dissly was mostly a blocker. I didn't even see Parkinson out there. And then a couple catches here by Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker. And listen, the Cleveland Browns are the best defense in the NFL. And we mostly kept Myles Garrett quiet today until the very end of the game, where I thought, oh man, this is the point in the game where he has his big sack and concludes the game the same way he did against, I forget who it was. Maybe it was the Steelers, or they had a big upset win earlier in the year, and it was because of, him coming alive late in the game. But he is very capable of dominating games, and we've seen that. I think he dominated last week or the week before. It must have been last week, because he put up 44 points in fantasy. But let's see his stat line here. 2 tackles, 1 sack, 1 tackle for a loss, 1 QB hit. Could have been a lot worse. Emerson on their team looks to be a good cornerback. He got an interception and a pass defense. And Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah also heard his name. Denzel Ward heard his name. Grant Delpit, Juan Thornhill heard all of their names throughout the day. They're a good defense. They have a lot of good players on this team. Zadarius Smith, also a good player, but I believe got injured at some point in this game. So they're no slouches. Maurice Hurst got a pick, and then Emerson, I very clearly remember that pick that he got. He jumped that route, and that was in the red zone. So that was a huge pick by this guy. Browns have an impressive team. I mean, even though they don't have Nick Chubb and Deshaun Watson, they have players. Like I said, they beat the Niners. They're 4-3. They came into this game 4-2. So I think they're going to cause damage. And when you look at the general NFL now, the Seahawks, ladies and gentlemen, because of the Niners' loss today, at week 8, at almost the halfway point of the NFL season, are first place in the NFC West. Alone. First place in the NFC West. Ahead of the damn Niners. Way ahead of the Rams. Way ahead of the Cardinals. Both lost today. Thank you, Cowboys. Thank you, Ravens. And for the Ravens, I hope you got all of your energy out in this game, because you're playing the Seahawks next week, and that's going to be a heck of a game. I was tuning into that game, and Ravens got a great defense. They were picking off Dobbs left and right, making big plays, stopping them on downs. And that offense for the Ravens, I mean, I know a lot of people out there like Lamar. I'm not a big Lamar fan, but he has playmakers. So he'll throw a lot of screens to Zay Flowers. Bateman, Odell, and Aguilar occasionally will get open, but it's really Mark Andrews, and they just keep pumping out these running backs. I forget who had the game for them today, but their running back, I think, had maybe like 3 touchdowns today. Two or three touchdowns. So I think the game next week is at Baltimore, which that's going to be tough. Changing time zones like this after a big win for the Seahawks, a themed win, wearing their retro jerseys. Really, really cool. The best jerseys in the league, in my opinion, those Seahawks retro jerseys. But it's going to be a tall task next week, going to the Eastern time zone, playing the Ravens. I remember the last time they played the Ravens, I believe, it must have been 4 years ago, and Lamar Jackson carved him up and ran all over him. So, got to be ready to stop Lamar. Surprisingly, I didn't see Lamar run as much today. I don't know if he is changing his game slightly. I hope so, because if that's the case, then the Seahawks will have a better chance, because the Seahawks defensive backs are finally becoming a unit. But it's going to be about stopping their run. I would actually be more concerned with stopping their running backs and the run game of Lamar if he decides to run, and then the de facto run game of Zay Flowers when he runs. And then also Mark Andrews finding his holes in that kind of middle part of, where the linebackers are. So I'd be concerned about that. But listen, huge win for the Seahawks here. Grabbing a win from the jaws of defeat, or however that saying goes. I mean, they really just pulled this one out when it seemed like they had nothing, absolutely nothing going for them outside of the first quarter. So great win. You survive. You go 5-2. You're first place in the NFC West. And you put yourself in a position to maybe have a little bit of slack going into this tough part of your schedule where you're going to be playing the Ravens, the Cowboys, the Eagles, the Niners, the Rams. So if you were 2-5 as opposed to 5-2, you would have no slack. You have a little bit of slack. You have a defense that is really coming together, holding the Browns here to 20 points after holding many other teams to less points. I mean, the Bengals, now seeing what they did against the Niners today, the Niners defense. I mean, what's going on with the Niners defense? Cincinnati put up 31 on them. Cincinnati could only put up 17, I believe, against the Seahawks. So I like the trajectory of the Seahawks. Geno was the only point of contention here, and he was still not perfect today by any means. But the ability to be clutch in the way that he was today and persevere and keep his head in the game was huge. That'll do it for this reaction podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, please go ahead and subscribe. Helps us out a lot. If you're listening on a podcast platform, Spotify, Amazon, Pandora, Apple Podcast, XO Player, Samsung, give us a rating. Drop a comment and follow us on there as well. We're on TikTok, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram. Exhale, Seahawks fans. Until next time, go Hawks. Have a fantastic day, football fans.